afternoon, everyone. Here we are in a bookstore. We've got our folks looking at us online, and we've got our customers here in person. It feels so great to be back in a bookstore with authors, and we can all be together and enjoy this wonderful book that we have in this presentation, this new book launch today for A Christmas Carol. This is really so special, so thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cheryl Bronstein, and I am one of the event coordinators here at Book Passage. And I just want to remind you to keep looking at our website because we are doing in-person events now, and we also have online events. We have events in other venues, so you don't want to miss anything because it's such a great time now, so please take a look at our website. Just a few little housekeeping issues here. We ask that you turn your cell phones silent, and we do have a restroom. It's in our other building. Finally, we'd like for you to wear your mask. I know, but we are in kind of tight quarters here. If you're sitting inside, we really appreciate it if you can keep your mask on for the duration of the event. Our authors will not be masked, and for all of you out there, when you publish your book and you have your book launch here and you come up to the stage at Book Passage, you too can take your mask off. But until then, we would really appreciate it if you keep it on. Holidays are approaching. We want everyone to stay safe. And as we are talking about current events here, I do want to mention the supply chain issues. They are real, and they are definitely impacting books. So some of you are in person here today. You have time to browse in a bookstore. Take your time and look at all the wonderful offerings we have for the holidays. If you see something today, please buy it. It is very unlikely that we will have it in the next couple weeks. So we want you to be happy with all your Christmas gifts. Please buy today. Shop early. It really is real. Also, for business owners who are here or listening, Book Passage has a very active business-to-business program. We can offer very attractive discounts for books that you want to purchase for your employees or for your clients. We ship all over the world. Books, as we all know, make the best gifts. So if I can entice any business owners out there to actually do their shopping here, it would be great. You make your customers and your staff very, very happy. Also, we have our two locations. We have this beautiful store here in Corte Madera, and we have our store in the Ferry Building. Both are open every day now for your shopping pleasure, so please come by. And finally, as we are all in person, holiday parties are coming around the corner. How about having a party here at the bookstore? Your own private party. Wouldn't that be amazing? You would be such a hero. People would be talking about your party for years to come. So if you're interested in that, just give the store a call. Say, I'm interested in hosting a private party. I will get you all the information, and you'll be a huge hero. Okay. Here at Book Passage, our mission is to enrich, engage, and inspire, and Book Passage has been a Bay Area institution for over 40 years. I have great gratitude to all our customers for helping us to keep the doors open, and we look forward to serving you for another 40 years. Well, when Charles Dickens would read from his classic, A Christmas Carol, he knew it was lengthy, and so for his readings, he cut it in half. Fast forward to 2020, 2021, and the most talented writer, Jesse Kornbluth, did the same. He has abridged this holiday classic to appeal to our younger audience and our older audience. His 13,000-word text and Paige Peterson's vibrant illustrations make this a new classic, and one that really needs to be in all the homes and to be enjoyed during this holiday season. Book Passage prides itself on supporting and promoting local authors, and we have so many talented writers here in Marin County. So this afternoon, we are so lucky to have one of our most beloved local authors, Paige Peterson. And Paige doesn't need much of an introduction. We all know and love her. She is a great friend of Book Passage, a huge patron of Tiburon and Belvedere. As a journalist, Paige Peterson was reported extensively on the Middle East, contributed to Marin Magazine, National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, New York Social Diary. She has illustrated the beloved book, Blackie the Horse Who Stood Still, which is a classic. She is also author of the Book Passage's best-selling book, which we have in stock again, Growing Up, Belvedere Tiburon. As a painter, she is represented by Gerald Peters Gallery in New York and has been honored by the Guildhall Academy of the Arts in East Hampton. Paige, as we all know, was raised in Belvedere, so we welcome her back. Thank you for coming, Paige. Jesse Kornbluth has an incredible resume. He is a New York-based writer. As a journalist, he was a contributing editor for Vanity Fair and New York Magazine. His books include Highly Confident, The Crime and Punishment of Michael Milken, and Married Sex, A Love Story. In digital media, he was an editorial director of America Online, and he now edits a cultural concierge website, Head Butler. And he has traveled all the way from his home in New York to be with us Marinites. So it is a great honor and privilege to welcome to our book passage stage this dynamic duo, Paige and Jesse.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, that was a ridiculous opening act, and it's hard to follow. So, Cheryl, how would you like to talk about Dickens? No. I'd like to tell a few stories. I'd like to have Paige talk about her illustrations, and then I'd like to address the question of who was Charles Dickens and what was he actually doing with Christmas Carol. So the first story is a personal story. I'd like you to picture a 9-year-old girl in New York City who plays the piano beautifully, is thinking of taking oboe, thinking of playing the trumpet also. She taught herself to read at age 5, speaks a little French, thinking of taking Russian or Chinese, plays soccer on her elementary school team, makes her bed every morning, washes the dishes, helps around the house, and as I say, is a great reader and writer. And it comes time when her father would like to read A Christmas Carol to her. And she is extremely excited about this. And he starts to read it to her, and she says, "This is great. Could it be longer? I want more." That girl does not exist. My 9-year-old daughter, who has grown up to be 19 and post-literate, said, "This is boring," and walked out of the room. This hurt my feelings considerably because long ago in the Pleistocene, I was a little Jewish boy who went to a New England boarding school, Milton Academy. And there, the night before we broke for Christmas vacation, the headmaster, a rail-thin guy with those crazy glasses, octagonal and no frame, whose father knew Emerson, Arthur Bliss Perry, would sit in a large chair, 2 large lights next to him with good shades, in the library. We would all be seated there. We would stand as he walked in. And then he would read A Christmas Carol. This was a catalytic moment for me. I always wanted to be a writer, and I had never really read Dickens. At that moment, I fell in love with Dickens, as well as all the aspects of what we were hearing, which was a story of Christian redemption. And it turned out that Arthur Bliss Perry read 13,000 words. He read half of the Dickens thing. He had edited it. And he'd edited it in very much the way that Dickens had. And so because I so wanted my daughter to have this experience, I basically did the same. There are perhaps people who feel that what Dickens did, that English authors are not to be tampered with. I'm a magna cum laude of an Ivy League school in English literature. And believe me, I don't have a bad feeling about what we did. Let me show you this one page, 395 words of Dickens. My daughter wasn't wrong. I'm not going to read it to you because it's just you get the idea. It's a lot of Victorian description. It's, we've seen movies, we know what it looks like. And it's not that he was paid by the word, but the story had to be a certain length. Here's my 105-word abridgment. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. The ancient tower of a church became invisible. It struck the hours and quarters in the clouds. The cold became intense. In the main street, the brightness of the shops made pale faces glow as they passed. Butcher shops became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant of pheasant and duck and goose, so it was next to impossible to believe that anyone anywhere had to think about such dull realities as bargains. Sight unseen. How many of you would like me to read the original 395 words? For those in the audience, 0. So abridging a text from long ago does not seem to me the crime that it might appear to the people who taught me way back then. What would Dickens think of what we did? I know what Dickens would think. On an American tour, Dickens was riding on a train, seated next to a little girl. She was an enormous fan of his work. And he therefore asked her what were her favorites. I mean, she had read some books several times. And she said, I love them all, but I do skip the dull parts. Once in a while, she said, not the short dull parts, but the long dull parts. Dickens laughed. Then he took out his notebook, asked what bored her, and took copious notes. Why? Because Dickens understood what many, many writers don't. There's only one important person when you're writing, and it is not you. It is the reader. So, one of the things that you can do, the next time you take a walk at night in any kind of suburban setting, this can't be done in New York, but in a suburban setting, look through the window at a house where the TV is on. It's not important what is on. Watch how often the screen changes. It's about every 7 seconds. Why is that? Because it is important that the director addict your eye freshly. And if there's a long shot, slow take, we're already talking foreign film at this point, right? It doesn't happen. So there's that. Here's another interesting thing I learned at AOL. When people go to a new website, how long do they stay there before they realize it's not what they want? 8 to 10 seconds. So it's worse now because our attention spans are considerably shorter because TikTok, YouTube, Fox News, everything exists to take us away from ourselves. I was once teaching in East Harlem on a volunteer thing, and I taught one English class a week. And I would say to the kids, who writes more each day, me or you? And they said, oh, you. You're a professional writer. You work all day. I said, no, you, because you text all day. And you text to a reader. You text to the girl you want to go out with. You text to your friends to set up what you're doing after school. And that is much more involving. If you have a choice between your own life and some dumbass classic book, no contest. So I'm totally key on appealing to the reader, and that is what Dickens did. In his best work, what you're looking at is a Victorian novel as a film. the way I write screenplays as novels. It looks like a play. Your eye goes right down the page. And one of the things actually I do in writing email, the email form is too wide. You notice this? And by the time you write to the end of the line, the eye is tired and has to go back to the beginning. I don't do that. My emails are blank verse. I write to the point of a comma or a punctuation and back, so that you can read down the page clearly. I mean, as I say, I was influenced by Dickens. I would like to be the new Dickens. I'm not, but I wanted to make it as easy as possible for the reader. Finally, may I give you my free lesson in writing? It's so simple. If you've seen the movie The King's Speech, you know this lesson. Just before the king, who stutters and stammers and is totally lame and should never have been the king, has to give his first important radio address, his elocution teacher, Geoffrey Rush, 30 seconds before he goes on, leans in and says, "Just say it to me, just say it to me as a friend." And that is what Dickens is doing. He is writing a story that can be told, and that is memorable as a story, not as a piece of writing. So when I'm teaching writing, I reduce it to the following. If you can think it, you can say it. If you can say it, you can write it. The hard part is the thinking. The other thing is something that I really learned from George Orwell. Orwell, who wrote a wonderful essay about Dickens, talks about prose like a window pane. Prose that takes you into the room, gives you the people, tells you the story. And that means what I call subject, verb, object. No passive verbs. Stephen King says the road to hell is paved with adverbs. No adverbs. Just say it to me as a friend. The way you say it on the phone to a friend, the way you text it to a friend. It's somewhat easier for me because I only type with one finger. I have written probably 500 million words with this finger, insured by Lloyd's of London for $10 million. No. And therefore, subject, verb, object makes a lot of sense to me. My books are short, 200 pages, in and out, 40,000 words. Some of my favorite books by James M. Cain, The Postman Always Rings Twice, Double Indemnity, 120 pages each. And they're in 1 trillion languages. So all of that comes into play in Dickens and in A Christmas Carol. I'd like Paige to talk for a bit, but then I'd like to come back and explore something with you, which is, what is the message of this book? I think there are two. I'll give you a preview. One is the message for children. Dickens wrote this book for money. His wife was pregnant. He was broke. He wrote it in 6 weeks. It sold out. I'll tell you what happened after later. And it tells a story that children can understand, which is, if you have a chance to do something good, be good. If you are a bad person, you can become a good person. I think there's much more in Dickens than that, but I understand why the great Christmas stories are the Jesus story, this, and O. Henry, the Gift of the Magi. If there's a fourth Christmas story, I'm pretty much unaware of it, and I think it's way down. I mean, if anyone can name one, help me here. So the reason that we love this story is it tells us what we want to believe. The Polar Express.
That's true.
The Polar Express is just the most amazing book. So I'd like Paige to talk about illustrations, and then I'd like to completely bum you out by what this thing is really about. Paige.
This is wonderful. Hi. When I had finished Blackie, the Horse Who Stood Still with Christopher Cerf, our book was reviewed, and we did very well with the book. But my favorite review was somebody said it looked like a skilled first grader drew it. And I was completely delighted because, of course, Picasso spent his entire life trying to get back to his 6-year-old self. So I felt that it was quite wonderful. When Jessie asked me to illustrate A Christmas Carol, I wanted to honor John Leach, who was Dickens' choice as an illustrator. And it was very Victorian, very dark, and really quite terrifying. So I wanted to honor John, but I also wanted to make it edgy. I wanted to make it much more modern, and yet not lose that feeling. I stayed with John Leach through part of it, but then I also thought, I'm going to do some really light sketches. I'm going to leave unfinished images on the page. I'm going to bleed out the page. I'm going to throw paint at it. I used crayons and markers, oil paint, acrylic paint, watercolor, ink, ballpoint pens. I threw all the rules out, and that's how I did it. When Jessie and I first did this book in 2011, it was a very small book, black and white, very, inexpensive paper, very small, and it was all, there was no color. So when we decided to redo this book, and I found our patron, Gretchen Kimball, who was so wonderful to have been our sponsor for this book, I told her I wanted to do it in full color and 100 weight paper, and to make it spectacular. And she gave us the gift of that for us to be able to do. So one of the things I wanted to show you, one of the things, I love repetitive images. So these are called end papers. And I did them in green, red, blue, and purple. And I actually started with purple and then decided that red and green had to be it. But I love the end papers, and I love that repetitive image. This is, okay, so how did I come up with inspirations for this? I was in the middle of breaking up with somebody who was difficult, and it was an unfortunate breakup. So I made his portrait that of Scrooge, which of course he was delighted by. It was a very funny thing to do. But so I got my inspiration from everything around me. I did very easy sketches, child-like, at ease, because I think it's really wonderful when children are looking at books to be able to feel that they too could do that. When I was a child looking at children's books, the illustrations were so, I could never have gotten near it or touched it or thought that I would be ever capable of drawing something like that. So I wanted it to be completely child-friendly, although some of them are quite, well, this one is not quite like that. This is the wonderful men in top hats that went to Scrooge and asked him for money, which of course he didn't get. I did a lot of dark, scary things. One of the things that I really loved about doing this is that I did all the illustrations in the classic artist's way, and then I went and computerized them and changed the color that only a computer could do, and it created a really interesting combination of things. This is Scrooge. One of the things that Jessie one time said to me, I don't understand your noses. But of course, I come from a family of noses, so I thought that was really fun to do. When Marley comes and is covered in chains, it is the first time that he realizes that he's seeing a ghost. When Scrooge was a little boy, when he was 12 years old, his parents left him at boarding school during Christmas. So, of course, that's the basis of this man's pathology and his sadness, which, of course, created his personality. I love these beautiful Victorian dancers. One of the other, and of course, plum pudding had to happen. Here's a ghost, an enormous ghost. He must be 12 feet high. We manipulated some of that. This is one of the last illustrations I did. It's very simple, ink and watercolor, very, very simple, but it was of a, the family, a simple family celebrating Christmas with a plum pudding. It had nothing to do with wealth. That was really important for us. Scrooge, a very unhappy man, to be sure. I went to Argentina, to Buenos Aires with my daughter, and I visited a wonderful cemetery there where Eva Perón is buried, and I had photographed all of the sculptures in the cemetery, and I liked the backs of them. So this is actually the back of a 12-foot sculpture in Buenos Aires, and I used that as the last ghost. Dickens, and of course this marvelous image of Tiny Tim. So I had a wonderful time illustrating this book. It was a great honor. This is a book that hasn't been out of print since 1843. So it was a bit daunting and also completely thrilling to be able to do this book, and hopefully it's an evergreen. And I'm so grateful for Jesse giving me the opportunity to be the illustrator.
Yes, and I'm so grateful for my daughter for being impossible. I'd like to talk about the aftermath and about the reality, and I'd like to take this story up to the present in ways that are disconcerting, and I apologize. I wish the world we were living in were slightly different, a lot different. What happened to this book? Dickens' publisher ripped off the copyright. Dickens sued to get the copyright back. He won in court. The publisher declared bankruptcy. Dickens now was 6 months after the book had sold out, had not seen a penny, and he had lawyer's fees. So if you go through Dickens' books, let's look ahead to Bleak House, which some of you may have read or have seen the fantastic BBC production. Bleak House is about a lawsuit, Jarndyce versus Jarndyce. It goes on for, it seems, centuries without resolution, because the lawyers do this and they're replaced by that and the judge says this. Many things happen, many hopes are dashed. The Tiny Tim figure in Bleak House, little Joe, dies. Not like in Christmas Carol, not a happy ending. And Dickens, who is writing in a cold, hard rage, and there's a side of Dickens in which he is at the very least the John Grisham of his time, says the following: "Dead, your majesty, dead, my lords and ladies, dead right reverends and wrong reverends of every order, dead men and women born with heavenly compassion in your heart, and dying thus around us every day." I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity in that. And it's not the kind of writing we see now very much, but we're living through a lot of moments that call for that. If I were redoing this book now, I would invoke the ghost of George Floyd. And, right? Those are the ghosts. The ghosts of people who have been wronged and who have not had justice. And of course, and the poor who are dying thus around us every day. 1 out of 4 children goes to bed hungry. 1 out of 6 Americans also has food shortages. You know all the statistics. And the fact that we are here in a beautiful store in a beautiful part of the country in no way insulates us from knowing these things. One of the things that's been really wonderful to me about being in Belvedere is, surrounded as I am by terrific white privilege, I've also met really terrific white people who are not, clipping coupons and, for their bonds. They know what's happening. They do good things. Gretchen, for example, uses money in wonderful ways. So it's not like here we are in a bubble, right? We know everything. So the question is, Dickens was dealing with systemic issues. A Christmas Carol is a children's book, right? It's a book for children. As I say, it tells us what we want to hear. As a message to adults, it tells us that redemption is possible. Right now, if you look at any poll of young kids, they think this country is on the brink. They think they're in personal trouble. They think the world could end in their lifetimes. I mean, the polling is staggeringly bad. So the question for me, and the question that I'm addressing in the book I'm writing now, is in a terrible time, what ennobles us, right? We can tell what story do we tell ourselves? What is the value we can give our lives so that we are not just animals struggling to feed ourselves and not be among the victims? And I think the answer in my book is, it's about what we can do on a daily basis to make our lives better for others, make lives better for others. And the Buddhists say all the suffering in the world comes from people seeking happiness for themselves. All the happiness in the world comes from people seeking to lessen the suffering of others. And since all books have morals, that is one that is not stated in my book, but it's sure as hell what it's about. Now I want to tell you just a terrible story. Sorry, it's really hard to talk about. This jerk kid and his jerk parents in this shooting in Michigan. 4 kids killed. One of them, Justin Schilling, was 17. He was an organ donor. He was an organ donor because he was underage and he made his mother do it, and so he was an organ donor. And there's a thing that happens when they're taking the kid off the life support, wheeling him to the operating room to have the organs taken. And nurses go along. It's like a row of nurses. And as someone said, you can always tell a husband of a nurse when that has happened that day, when she comes home. So there's a fantastic picture on Twitter, because at the hospital there was a bridge, a glassed-in bridge from one building to the next. Has anyone seen this picture yesterday? You saw? So under that bridge were 300 people who were bearing witness to what was happening and beaming love and support to the parents. To me, that's the picture of the month. Because what it says is that people want to be good, that many people are fundamentally good, and that there are splendid opportunities in the midst of dreadful stuff to do good in the world. And to me, that was just a gorgeous picture in so many ways and on so many levels. And I kind of think what Dickens told is a very prettified story of that, right? Tiny Tim's going to die. And that's going to break his parents' heart, particularly the father, who's very vulnerable and who's all about the kids. And like a lot of men, he's less able to cope than his wife. Old story. So one of the reasons I love this book is something that happened the other day when we read at a Catholic school. We talked about this book. Middle school kids, little kids of 5th to 8th grade. And they all got it because they were little Catholic kids and they'd had this education. And what they knew was to be good to other people if you can. And that was just so lovely. I mean, the world may teach them different, it may break them later, but they had it then. And the thing about this book is when you read it to a child, and I hope to live long enough to read it to a grandchild, or just go to schools and read it to some kid who's not mine, everybody feels good. And most feel-good stories I find to be just so treacly. I mean, I just can't bear them. But this has validity. This has a great narrative. It has wonderful characters. And it has a guy who, though terrible, basically comes out of jail, a jail he's built for himself, and does great things. So it's been a real privilege to stand on Dickens' shoulders and do this. And thank you very much for putting up with our talking about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions, please?
You were going to tell us more about Dickens.
Oh, I did.
Did you cover all of them? His personality and so forth?
Oh, you read the books. Read the book. Yeah, no. I mean, Dickens had a mistress. I mean, do you want to hear that stuff? I mean, yeah, no. It's all on the biographies, on sale at Book Passage. But no, Dickens had a complicated life. I mean, you do know about the blacking factory, right? That Dickens, as a boy, his father went to the poorhouse, and they put him in jail, right, for being poor. It was very, very similar to now. And Dickens went to a blacking factory. I think it was making something with pencils for not very long. But, you take a sensitive kid and you put that kid in a negative environment, that kid is going to be traumatized for life. And so that clearly was Dickens. The other thing I like about Dickens is he was a walker. Dickens could walk 25 miles a night, and he walked a lot in London. And in his walking, he wrote. And I write when I walk, too. I have these 3x5 cards. I go out for a walk in the morning, and I basically say, God gives me my march orders, and I come in and type it out. So, if you are trying to do anything creative, go walking, or as people say, the shower, whatever. But yes, Dickens' life is both complicated and simple, and he also worked himself to death, which I'm too old to do. Yes.
Was it ever a struggle for you to take his work and condense it in a way where he went back and forth and back and forth?
No. I've said there is no nonfiction book that I can't write in 4,000 words. I was a journalist, right? A journalist's obligation is to start with the first sentence that makes you want to read the story, moves you through the story, you don't even notice there's a middle, it ends, and you say, I can read more. Great. That's what I did for Tina Brown for years and years and years. So, no. Cutting the fat, I mean, Tina would say, it'll cut like butter, right? So, yeah, no, it was quite clear what I had to do. It was surgical. I've described what I did as essentially like there's a hole in the knee, and I've sewed up the jeans, right? So that you don't notice. Who is the Beau Brummel, the great dandy, was an incredible liar because he took 3 hours sometimes to tie his tie, but he said, if you noticed me, I wasn't well dressed. Nonsense. But the idea for what I do, if you notice what I did, that's my bad.
You also have to remember, Jesse and I went to a museum to see all of Dickens' artifacts, his desk and his books. And in one of the books, he edits the text himself because he read it 127 times. And each time he edited it. So Jesse was really doing what Dickens did when he read A Christmas Carol, because it's impossible to read A Christmas Carol out loud. But now Dickens had created an edited version, which Jesse.
There's one other thing. Mike Nichols has said, I'm an artist, but I'm also a commercial artist. And that was Dickens, right? He had 6 kids. He had the choice that I have. You either make a go of it as a writer or you drive an Uber, right? And so Dickens didn't want the equivalent of the Uber. He didn't want to be Bob Cratchit, sitting writing somebody else's copy. He had a fairly strong ego drive, and there's nothing more egotistical than writing novel after novel. It's just not openly egotistical. So, yeah.
I understand that the book is already a huge success in New York. Can we look forward to?
The book, really? Thank you. Who do you understand that from?
I have.
You have sources.
I'm also a journalist, so we have, as they say.
Yeah.
I know what you know, and you know what I know.
If only.
And a lot more. But more to the point, can we expect this cooperation to continue next year, maybe on a similar project?
No, but this is what you can expect. One of my friends is and thank you for the question, is a publicist, a publicity person who's gone out on her own. She's terribly successful, and she represents hotel chains. And she says, wouldn't it be great if X hotel chain decided to do a new version of Eloise, but at their hotel? And you and Paige could do it. And at that point, that would be great. Basically, the commercial future of this book is that I sell my novel for so much money that they say, well, what else you got? Right? And I say, well, how would you like to put out, an edition under your thing, right, under your logo? So at that point, everything becomes real because you have a machine behind you. The machine is Gretchen, Paige, me, Cheryl. So no, my book I just discovered, my own book, lends itself to a sequel. Hadn't realized that, but and maybe I could do that. But no, we could do another of these. And one of the things I learned today is, and I could have known it from talking to the librarian at the Belvedere Library, is how much kids like graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
So if I were a smarty, I would write a graphic novel, and Paige would know how to do that. And
perhaps we will.
And then we would come back, and you would tell me how big we are in New York. Sounds good to me. Thank you. Yes.
Paige, if you could illustrate 2 other scenes in the book, what would they be?
Illustrate, or what do you mean?
If you were to draw another 2 illustrations for A Christmas Carol, what scenes might you choose?
I probably would have gotten more involved with the ghosts. I think that's a critical part of the story of where he begins to find his enlightenment. In a way, this story is, we have to forgive Scrooge for who he is, and in the end love him for what he became. So I would focus on that journey more about his involvement. And of course, as an illustrator, to put it to bed is really painful. You just think, oh no, give me another week. But one of the things that happened to me, which was unfortunate, the day that we made the deal to do the book, I fell and broke my wrist in 4 places, and so right away I was already behind the 8 ball, and I could not do anything for 2 months. According to the surgeon, I wasn't allowed to hold a pen for don't do anything for 2 months. So I was already behind. So that was really unfortunate. But I did as much as I could. And also, we didn't want to fill up these pages with images. We wanted children to really pay attention to the words and to read. So it was, Jesse and I agreed upon how many, there are 50 illustrations in the book. But of course, you always want another shot at a book every single time. And of course, the minute you send it off, and Debbie's here, she's an author. The minute you send it off to your to the printer, you think, oh, come on, wait a minute. I meant to do that.
There is a scene that a line I would have cut, because it makes you cry, and there's enough sadness in this book. When Tiny Tim says to his father, that they're in church, he said, "It was good for me to be there so people could see me and feel good about themselves and feel something for others." It's like, when you talk to a kid who's got leukemia, right? I mean, you just think, how do they do it? And as a writer, I'm always interested in how do they do it? How do people put up with their lives? How do they keep going? And so very hard to illustrate that better in words, and I cut it from the book because I just thought, enough. Let's keep it on Scrooge. Good question, thanks.
Very good.
Anything else? Meeting adjourned?
All right. What a great presentation.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, this was awesome.
It's a,
Yeah, very good.
Now it's time for you to go to the bookstore and purchase this book. And
Thank
you need to get more than one because this is such an amazing gift. And I know you all have kids and other young adults, old adults that would want this book in their home. And Jesse and Paige are going to sit here and they're going to personalize and they're going to autograph these books and we can gift wrap them for you. You can ship them out to all your friends and family across the country. So please, go ahead and do that. And then look, we also have, you haven't gotten it yet, Growing Up Belvedere Tiburon, the classic. It's back in stock. It's an amazing book. If you live in the peninsula, you have to have this book. So thank you again so much for coming. Thank you to our two talented authors and illustrators.
Thank you.
It's been an amazing afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks for supporting book classes.
Thank you.